Okay, we've still got some people arriving, but we might get started. Welcome to our discussion today about a new economy for the arts. My name is Görkem Ajaralu, and I'm a theatre director based in Melbourne, Australia. Today's webinar will build on the discussion held during our previous Advocate for the Future of the Arts session on the 3rd of April. Today, we're going to reflect on how the current COVID-19 crisis might be an opportunity to rethink the economy of our sector and shift paradigms. After this period of destruction, rather than attempting to retrieve what the sector was before, we can collaboratively aim at constructing a new order of interaction and exchange. In our last session, the conversation was very much about a long-term survival plan. Not what we needed right now, but where we want to be when we come out the other end. I'll briefly recap some of what we discussed in last session. We spoke about artists being at the center, building institutions around artists and not around structures. We spoke about letting public decision makers know what it means to protect artists, and we recommended that people running arts organizations should include artists in decision-making now. We spoke about data and noted that policymakers do not have accurate data about our sector. It was suggested that we gather real data and ensure that this is used to make decisions about the arts. We spoke about funding and the need to be independent of public funds and institutional funds and to find alternatives. It was recommended that we speak with funding decision makers now. We spoke about advocacy around the relevance of our sector and obtaining support from the general public. It was noted that this crisis had demonstrated that we are not a relevant sector to many governments around the world, and we wondered how we might articulate the importance of culture. It was recommended that we emphasize the social role of art and that it is not just a creative industry. We asked how to keep connection with our audiences using digital platforms, and we wondered if this digital connection now would translate to people attending later. We spoke about capitalizing on the yearning for the live that will surely come after all this is over. Lastly, we discussed a coordinated international campaign that delivered the same message across the world, that culture is relevant. So in today's session, we will ask, how can we place artists and audiences at the center and build institutions around them? How can we shift our economy to more sharing models, focusing on processes rather than on products? How to change the nature and conditions of funding to reflect the social role of the arts, how to be less dependent on public sources, and how to build bridges with other sectors to be stronger today, together. We don't want to retrieve the sector as it used to be, which was extremely precarious, dependent on public funding and centralized. We also need to agree on the challenges that we are facing. It's not only coronavirus, it's also climate crisis, cultural rights limitations, and social responsibility. And we need to look at other models of organization that exist so that we can imagine how we want to build the future sector. So briefly, I'd just like to talk about the rules for today's discussion. If you would like to speak, please put your name, where you're from, or your country into the chat, and I will introduce you to speak. Please try and keep your comments and questions to under a minute. And if you would like to say something, contribute something to the conversation, but you would prefer not to speak, then please don't worry about putting your name and country of origin, just put the comment and I will read it out. So you have two options for contributing to the discussion today. Now, to help us with this discussion, I would like to introduce economist Raúl Abeledo Sanchez from Spain. Raúl is part of EconCult, the research unit in cultural economics at the University of Valencia, where he's been a teacher since 2008 and a researcher since 2006 in the Applied Economics Department. His main focus is environmental sustainability, local development, and cultural planning. Previously, Raúl developed his professional activity in private consulting as Director of European Projects at IMEDAS, 1999 to 2006. His research analyzes the relationship between cultural activities and the dynamics of innovation and territorial development. He's currently the main researcher on a number of European projects. Raul will begin with a short discussion about what we need in order to change from a pre-COVID-19 situation, and then he'll follow this with a discussion about the key issues for an action agenda. Thank you, Raul.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? It's okay, the sound, the vision?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's my good profile, so I hope the vision is good. Okay. Thanks for the presentation, Godkem. My idea for this webinar is more than develop this kind of masterclass. This is a nonsense because in some way nobody knows or has a magic formula to act in this situation that it's new in some sense, but to put in value some kind of keywords, questions, elements of an analysis, context, pictures, if you want, cards, in order to combine this kind of images and create some kind of narrative with this that will be useful to debate, to analyze, or to start to imagine possible developments, possible ways to react. Okay, so in this sense, my first comment will be to consider which one is the context. No, as you know from the previous webinar, the starting point was not a paradise, and in some way, I'm going also to speak about I'm going to present arguments for sure, but as I told you, I'm conscient that this is my approach, this is my vision, and my vision is in some way affected, if you want, because my values. Well, okay, my values in the sense of my kind of perspective analysis. As Gorkem said, my approach is economist, so I'm working from the tools of economic analysis. I'm teaching about public policies in the university, so I'm working also with this kind of tools. And I'm also, my research is connected with ecological economics. So the question of the ecology and ecological approach is always present in this sense. So in this sense, my presentation is going to be focused also with the question of the, this is a political speech in some way, okay? A political speech because this is not a technical or not just a technical approach or technical analysis, but what we are talking about culture, what we are talking about relationships between culture and development, what we are talking about cultural rights, all these elements are on the table, okay? Especially from the point of view of the starting point, the previous situation before the COVID, and if you want, even before the economic crisis of 2008, the financial crisis. And in this sense, the first elements that I want to combine are three main actors that are playing this game, or three main logical approaches. One is the market. In this sense, the market, as you know, we are in a scenario of globalization of financial movements, so speculation is everywhere, and this economic market is also, this globalization of the market is also ideologically oriented from the point of view of neoliberal thoughts. Okay, so laissez-faire, laissez-passer, in the sense of let the market work and try not to influence with public policies and so on. This will be a first question that we must to take into consideration. So from the second actor is the state, the public policies. Okay, in this sense, another question that I will put on the table is the rising of populism around the world, everywhere. We have from Trump in the United States to Bolsonaro in Brazil. We have a case of Hungary in Europe, Poland. I mean, even in Spain, for example, with questions of censorship and so on, cultural rights are being affected in the sense that economic crisis is not a good partner for cultural freedom and freedom in general. So this will be another question that we must to take into account. The third actor in this scenario, in this mise en scène, in this context, that power in some way is a keyword, is civil society. Okay, and the cultural sector in this scenario of how the civil society it's in some way a sandwich between this kind of pressures from the market, and you know, market also from the question of the work, the labor market, sorry, and the precarity that it's affecting to this kind of flexibility formulas and so on, that the cultural sector is especially affected, and also the question of the democracy from the point of view, the menage to democracy of this kind of rising of populism, no? And how it's affecting, and how why we need more than ever a civil society empowered with the capacity to put pressure on the governments to mobilize, to fight for their rights, as the Beastie Boys sang, and how all this scenario in some way is a very basic thing to take into account for what can we, where are we coming, which one is the past, and some way which one is the influence of the COVID crisis in what I would suggest can be an acceleration of all these processes. Okay, and again, with another songwriter reference, as Tom Waits sang, or sing in this case, Yesterday is Here, how we are funding some kind of elements that since many, many, many years ago, we consider were out of the picture, but in some way, this kind of ghosts are again here on the global map. Okay, so in this sense, which one is the relationship of the culture or the value of the culture in terms of the development of the society and the model of development of the society that we want? Okay, because this is the first reference. What kind of model of development are we talking about? We know this kind, the dominant model of development, it has a very important lack in terms of ecological sustainability, also in terms of social inclusion. I imagine everyone knows what we are talking, what I'm talking about, and even in terms of democracy practices. So in this sense, what can be the role of culture? And I will introduce right now, not just culture, but also two sectors that interact and have a very important feedback with culture, as education and communication are. in terms of knowledge production and in terms of knowledge transference. No, we are talking about, we are in the knowledge society in this sense, and what kind of role can play culture in the transition, in the transformation of the dominant model of development, and what can be the challenges from the point of view of how to transform this kind of power structures associated with the dominant model of development. This will be the first question that I will put on the table. In order to concrete this kind of paradigm, I would suggest you, if you don't know, I suppose a lot of people will know about this, the reference of the Agenda 21 for culture, okay? That from the local governments are designing in order to put culture in the center of local development policies with the criteria of a sustainable development and a human development and reinforcement of democratic practices. Okay, this will be a first thing that I will put on the table. And in order to clarify also why when we need to, I mean, there will be for sure different degrees. You are a very wide audience with different profiles. Diversity in this sense is also a key word, and I'm trying to find connecting elements, okay? For sure, later there will be proposals more connected with commercial orientation or more connected with politically correct or so on. But in some way, the scenario is common for everybody, okay? And especially when we are talking about the majority of the cultural sector that is connected with this, in this sense, to the precariousness, to the atomism, small and medium companies, precariat, freelancers, and so on. I mean, for sure, there are big companies. For sure, we have Netflix, but Netflix is more the exception than from the point of view of the employment and from the point of view of the people. It's more the exception, as I said, than the rule, no, than the majority of the scenario, no? of the elements. So this will be the first question to consider. How this approach that we are combining, this kind of market analysis and the structure of the market, this kind of also bipolar situation of the cultural sector with very big companies, multinationals, majors, and so on. If we are talking about music, for example, or some sectors like audiovisual, this is more clear in some sectors than others. But how, in some way, we need, in order to start the different strategies from adaptation to more radical transformation, to create this kind of new vision for transforming this society, to be, first of all, conscient of what was not going on well in the old paradigm and what we need to change in this old paradigm in terms of to develop a sustainable long-term vision from this moment. How we can develop strategies in order to transform this scenario, or at least to survive in this scenario, how we can avoid in some way this acceleration that, as I told you, I'm not sure if the word is correct in English, the inertia, okay, the situation, if we let the market to continue, or we let the public policies to continue, to the administration, bureaucracy, and so on, to continue in the same way, this is going to provoke a scenario for wars, okay? This inertia is going to create this kind of a scenario of acceleration that I was talking about, okay? If we don't want to go for more than the same, that as I told you, is a risk, because the history, the really close history, it was the solution for the previous crisis, for the financial crisis. Okay, you know this famous words from Sarkozy about in 2008 about refundation of capitalism, and finally the solution was more austerity, more cutting in the budget of the education, health, culture, and so on. So if we don't want to have more of the same in a higher degree, we need in some way to create a position. Okay, this will let us. So this is for me like the scenario. Okay, this will lead us to the second part of the webinar, in which I hope to be clear in my exposition, because it's not easy. I want to go really, really wide, but at the same time trying to concrete. But I hope to be, in this sense, inspiring, and then, sorry for my English also, and then to be able to concrete some of the questions that I'm right now throwing, okay, to the public in a provocative way sometimes, to create this debate, okay, and to dialogue with you in order to concrete all these aspects, how can be operative, or how can be translated into day-by-day reality and an action plan, or so on, okay? As I told you, from these elements of this vision, the second part of the speech that I'm going to start right now is how this can be translated into an operative proposal, into a technical approach. Okay, as I told you, this is like a tandem. Okay, like a bicycle, two people bicycle. The political vision is necessary in order to address what we are looking for, which one is the landscape we are moving in, which one is the sea we are sailing, and then we need this kind of technical elements, tools, approaches, methodologies, and so on, in order to develop this vision and to materialize this vision, okay, in order to pass from the idea to the reality. In this sense, I will put again two elements on the table, or two keywords that are important. First is organization. Organization is a must. I mean, to consider the organization strategies is a must. In this sense, we are going to see what kind of roles are necessary from the point of view of the role that the sectorial associations must play in this scenario that we are talking about in the previous part, about this more political vision. We are talking about the model that we are organizing ourselves, how we interact with the through networks, for example, through strategic alliances, how we develop this through communication plans. I mean, going more to concrete tools and elements. A basic question, it's also connected with not just what kind, it's clear for us as cultural agents, which one is the role and which one is the value of culture. But without a clear improvement of the social value of culture from the point of view of society, this is like impossible mission, in the sense that what we are talking about, no? This question of the social value of culture, it's a must that the society have a clear appreciation of the value of culture for them. Okay, and this is not always easy. And for example, in Spain, this is not really a strength. It's more a weakness than a strength. And without the support of the society, cultural sector alone, and sometimes cultural sector has been a little bit autist in this sense, if you let me the expression, and communication strategies have been not very effective or concrete or in mind from the action, cultural action. And also this question of the arts for the art's sake approach, okay, isolated from the value of the culture for the local development of the more from the approach of the social value, fight against social exclusion, human development, and so on. Sometimes it has been not clear that we have been pushing all the efforts, all the possible efforts in this way. This is right now a must to invest in communication, to invest in sensitize the society about the value of the culture, because without this strategic alliance of the social actors, we are going nowhere. This will be another thing that I will put on the table. In this sense, I'm talking about organization, as you can see, organizative strategies at a micro level from the point of view of our day by day, but also from more a wide scenario, from a macro approach with this society, with the sector, even from the kind of actions, not just at the local level, but at the regional level, and how we are connecting these networks as from the point of view of transnational, translocal level, connecting territories and developing also a global scenario to work. Because as we said at the beginning, we are working in this kind of global scenario, and the challenges, but also the possible solutions, we need to act local and think globally, and the opposite too. We need to think global and act globally. In this sense, it's a two-way approach. Okay, and in order to start to close this kind of presentation, that we want to do it short, because I think the different elements are more or less on the right now on the table. Not sure if in a clear way, but in some way the cards are on the table. We need to start to combine these pictures with the dialogue that I propose you to start once I finish this first part. As I told you, knowledge was one of the keywords. The second keyword is knowledge. How we manage knowledge, how we design projects in this sense. And from this, the design project, design management, we need to do analysis, diagnosis, to elaborate action plans, project management in this sense that we are working with. We need to know how to manage information about questions like the legal framework, the budget, how to construct a budget. We need really, in order to sail this stormy weather, we need it's a must. It was a must previously, but now it's an urgency to develop at least a basic entrepreneurial competencies in terms of management of legal issues, and in terms of manage questions linked with financial and economic management. Okay, not just these ones, but this one, as you know, we are living in a capitalist and market society, and without these tools, we can not move outside of home. No? Not just this one, we need for sure also communication competencies and so on, technological alphabetization, etc., because the digitalization, it's also another question that we are thinking that this crisis is going to accelerate in this sense. But these two that usually create some kind of refuse, no? The question of legal agenda and economic agenda, it's something that it's not a pleasure usually, except from very vicious people like me. and even not fun for me. I prefer to paint than to work with Excel pages. But as I told you, we need this. Is a must. It's a need in order to work and in order to pass from the idea to the reality, and in order also even to avoid to be a sheep in the middle of the wolves. Okay, so this kind of two big pillars that we are talking about, organization strategies that we are talking about, knowledge management, how this is concrete with the question of the project management and project design is it's really important to consider from the point of view of the technical approach and possible operative solutions to the adaptation, resilience, resistance, innovation. I mean, we are looking for different kind of strategies and situation in this sense, according to the specific situation of each one of you. And in order to close this speech, I hope to have to be an inspiring speech and not a mess. Okay, I know it's not easy because it's some kind of brainstorming and avalanche of concepts and ideas. So I think we need also a little bit of to put on the table. I mean, to go for we need some minutes maybe for a digestive of this and to create some kind. But for sure, I think while I was talking, even in my bad English, some kind of connections in your brain, some kind of ideas, some kind of feelings, some kind of neuronas have said, hello, I'm here. Okay, so that's why I will use to create this debate, I hope. And in order to close this first part and trying to be more less a poet and more an economist, three elements again in this kind of operative strategies are basic. Okay, one is audiences. Which one is our relations with the audiences? What kind of audiences we are addressing? How these audiences are linked with the first political vision we were talking about: cultural rights, process of social exclusion, question of climate change, all the question of the degradation of the environmental crisis, all the question of this more, how we are working values with which audiences and how we are addressing to these audiences. Okay, what kind of role we are playing as intermediaries to create add value and to connect our role of cultural actors in this mission of the culture as a central pillar of this kind of transformation in our societies. Okay, this will be a first question. Second, the question of services. What kind of services are we providing for these audiences? Okay, we are in this sense, as a lot of reports and so on are talking about, creative services, and to pass from products, artistic objects and so on to services, to put in value our strength as cultural actors, and I'm including myself as cultural researcher, the question of the creativity, the question of the imagination, the question of this kind of creative competences are our strength. I said, the entrepreneurial competencies we need to train a little bit more, okay? But the creative competencies seems that are the good strengths. How we can put these strengths into services to develop, to innovate, to develop our menu, our agenda, our list of services as a cultural producers, cultural managers, etc., etc. How we can create add value for these audiences. And third, connected with these two topics, the question, for sure, as always, money, the funding. How these two elements can create some kind of virtuous circle in order to create synergies to diversify our funding sources. As I told you, my impression is that the coronavirus, the COVID, is going to provoke some kind of acceleration of the internationalization needs, for example, for the cultural sector, okay? Because as we are seeing, even from the point of view of the state, in the case of Spain, Spain cannot go alone to the exit of this crisis without the help, without the support of the European Union. And the same in Italy, and the same in the different countries. No, some countries in the north of Europe are in a better situation, but at least we are connected, and we cannot be island in the middle of the apocalypse. In this sense, we are in the same planet, we are in the same situation, economies are interconnected, and finally, this creates some kind of connection, and we share this kind of negative impacts, okay? But again, if the local sources of funding, public administration, and we see public administration is going to be really a door that is going to be affected when we are knocking for public funding, because as we are seeing, the state is nowadays without cash, because economic crisis is affecting in the taxes and in the way they get money. So this is going to be a first question to consider, how we diversify. If we are dependent from the public administration, how we can find alternatives from the point of view of the private actors, or even this relationship we were talking about with the what kind of relationship we have with the civil society. Okay, maybe not solutions of market, but solutions linked also with the relationship with our audiences, etc., etc. Not just the question of the nature of actors, transition from a diversification strategy from public to private, and maybe also to civil society, but between the different levels of the public administration or the different territorial levels. Not just local, regional, national, that is the usual way, but also how this is connected with the international needs. What kind of complementary funds can develop, for example, European projects and so on. Okay, this will be also another question, that how to move in this sense, and the artistic mobility, it's also a basic competence that we need. We know also at the same time that this is one of the strengths of the sector. So in some way, this is not a big problem. And finally, also this question of the, we were talking about the strategies, the models of organization, the question of knowledge and so on. And in order to put another question that for me it's really important, is it was a question that the first time I hear about was in an Interreg project presentation in one of the final conference, and was in Marseille. And there was the relationship between the social economy and the cultural sector. At this moment, it was like a possibility and a mutual benefit relationship between how cultural actors can in some way update the social economy model, that it's really, really old-fashioned from the 70s and so on, and the kind of sectors that are linked with more agriculture or so on are like all, they need to refresh in some way the arguments, the speech and so on. And at the same time, how all these tools of the social economy, labor cooperatives and so on, in this way that we were talking about the models of organization, can be an interesting background to use it in the cultural sector. Okay? If you are agree, what I will do now, it's more or less 30 minutes, 15 minutes, as we were planning in the beginning with Gorkem, sorry. So if you want, we can pass to the debate, make the comments and so on.
Raul, we've actually got a couple of people have already started putting some questions through. We've got Nuno from France has asked, the support engagement of civil society is essential to strengthen the cultural sector and players. The big market players need to flatten the artistic curve to have the most easily consumable cultural products in order to increase profit. In this tension, how do we ensure the singularity of the artistic production from economic perspective? What are the economic strategies allowing to increase the profit margin from singular products instead of mass production? Did you want to speak to that, Raul?
Okay, I will recommend you all, and this is a book that it's coming to my mind these days, because in some way, as I told you before, this yesterday's here song that I recommend you to hear, it's this kind of feeling, no, about how the circle is closing and things that were from the past nowadays are reappearing, no? And it is in this sense, as I told you, I was working on the topic of ecological economics until 2006. And then I started to connect this topic, but in the beginning was more cultural planning and cultural economics. But the scenario behind, never lose the contact with ecological economics, because my topic is, we are talking about sustainable human development. And from this point of view, the territory, the ecological systems are a must, and the population and the society, it's also, I mean, the meaning of the development. Without this, development is for people, and development is with environment. Without this, is impossible, okay? This is just because there is a book called, from these days, that I contact the first time, that is called, if my memory is good, Small is Beautiful. From the writer is Schumacher, okay? And it's one of the reference of the ecological thinking and ecological movement, in the sense of the question of scale, okay? In this sense, about the kind of game we can play, I mean, the majority of people, okay? I'm sure that this is not going to be a formula that it's useful for everybody, but in some times, I think, in some way, it's a question of dimension, okay? And a question of resources. From my mind, I mean, in my mind, the sector, the majority of the sector is connected with this kind of, our capital, our main capital, is not the financial capital. There is some rich one on the room. Please identify yourself, just in order to ask for some money. Okay, I mean, usually the lack of capital and the lack of funding is the rule. Okay, but as I told you again, work and creative competences, and maybe relational capital, I mean, the capital, the networks that we have are our strengths. So in some way, my strategy will be how we can reduce the dependency on what we have not. At minimum, I mean, for sure, we need capital, for sure, we need this kind of resources, but how we can minimize the dependency on this, and how we can increase the value of the resources that for us are abundant, and sometimes we don't think seriously about this, because it's so abundant that for us it's like, okay, this is it has not a special value. As you know, when we have more of something, sometimes we don't take into account, okay? In this sense, again, this formula of the social economy and work cooperatives that I was working in the beginning, okay? This is important. At the same time, what kind of market we can be competitive, or we can at least survive, okay? because in some way there is not one market. There are diversity of markets. There are different, rooms in this market, and markets that sometimes some markets are oligopolistic markets that it's impossible to work in, and sometimes there are markets that are more easy for us to work with. Okay, how we can work at a scale, okay, from the point of view of territory, but also from the point of view of this market, that it fits with our particular dimension, or through these network formulas, okay, how we can find our space, how we can make a diagnosis of the market in order to create our own space, and develop this kind of, that the economist said, what's the word in English? Sorry, because it's not easy. Specialization strategies from the point of view of the difference. Which one is the difference that I can use? It makes me different to others, and I can create some kind of value as mediator. Okay, this is important. For this is because what I told you, that the question of the economic analysis is important, but more than economic analysis that can do an economist standard, your own economic analysis and your creative economic analysis. Use your imagination. This is very, very, very important in order to develop this kind of strategies of to find your own place in the market and to occupy this space. Okay? Because if you don't do, finally this space is going to be occupied for someone else. And sometimes not someone else like you, but someone else like the big fish. Okay? So this will be a first question to consider. In this sense, for example, we are working in an Interreg project that is connected with that. How the Mediterranean countries, how the small and medium companies can develop their own internationalization strategies, and how can demand to the public administration support to develop their internationalization strategies, because you need to occupy your space. If you don't occupy your space and you demand support and you create this kind of alliances and networks to create some kind of pressure, is okay. If work is, and the small companies are the majority, and in terms maybe not of incomes, because for sure capital is by the other side, big companies, but in terms of labor and employment, how we can create this kind of mutualization to networks and so on, in order to put in value the numbers in terms of work. Okay?
Raul, we've got another question here about organization. What are some of the models of organization that we might consider from beyond the cultural sector? And also, we've been asked to be more specific about organization. What does it look like and with whom? So what are some of the models of organization that we might consider, and can you be more specific, please, about organization?
Okay. Sometimes it's not easy to concrete, because, I mean, in some way, I'm not a specialist in everything. My approach is more a generalistic approach, okay, in order to have some kind of systematic approach to the analysis, okay? I'm not sure if I answered to the question of Nuno. Sorry, Nuno. If you need to clarify more the question, please let me in, because it's not easy at this time also to read and to be sure that I'm answering in 100% degree of detail each question, okay? In reference to this question, and sometimes I have not the answer to every question for sure, but in terms of the organization, I will put the focus in the question of the social economy and third economy and models linked with cooperatives, okay? And cooperatives of work. And models link also with what we were talking about, this kind of role and how to empower and the way the sectorial associations, it's a work union in some sense, okay? A work union from the point of view of the different sectors, but also in terms of what we were doing about business models, in the sense of maybe cooperatives of services, because as we said, we need to create this kind of strategic alliances between not just our own sector, like here in ITM, but maybe we need to create some kind of strategic alliances with other sectors in order to make a common position from the point of view of the cultural sector, the different disciplines and so on. I mean, again, the union makes the strength, okay? But at the same time, we have to be flexible. I mean, this is not a question to create a model of rigid union or to create this kind of it has to be really flexible in order to adapt because to the evolution of the situation. So this is also another important thing. It must be a modular approach or a modular strategy. Okay, so I will, if I have to design or I have to put criteria of design of this model of organization, I will speak about trans-sectorial organization because we have more in common than differences. For sure, there are differences between sectors. I mean, it's not the same the capacity of adaptation that has digital arts than l'art de la rue, no? The circus. No? The productive process of these two disciplines is really different. The adaptation to the telework or the digitalization, it's more easy in some cases, it's more difficult in others. Even the impact is different from sectors, no? According to their so it's how we can combine, how we can manage a common what's the word in English? A common route or a common work route, okay? I'm not sure how it's in
direction.
Yeah, a common
Pathway.
a common plan, but at the same time common
Purpose.
plan.
Purpose. Yeah.
But at the same time, how we can also in this to make some kind, it's like an equalization, okay? How we can equalize the sound of this plan according to the specificities of the different sectors or different situations. But for sure, the mixed table is the same. Okay, again, the analogies, as you can see, are my favorite thing, but I hope to be clear. So this will be also this question of transsectorial, this question of multi-level also in order to connect the different levels of territories from the local to the regional, from the regional to the national, from the local in this country to the local to this other country, this translocal also networks. I mean, it's a question of, and for this is basic, how we can find partners in this long way road, no? In order to, again, for what is useful a network, transfer knowledge, learn by doing and share knowledge and find complementarities and share services. For example, I'm not sure you know about, or maybe yes, or maybe not. Yesterday I was teaching with the students and they are younger than us, I suppose. I was talking about the time banks. You know about the time banks, where really in the time, at the time of the crisis in 2009, 8, 9, 10, there were these experiences of non-monetary exchange models. Okay, how we can exchange services without money. Okay, again, if I'm talking about that money is not our strength, but work it is, how we can develop systems, and for this, again, digital tools can be a really important resource, and can be really helpful in this sense, okay? How we can exchange services without money, in the sense of this kind of primitive economy, okay? This will be also an important thing. And I think one key word in order to answer this question, I think we need to have in mind hackers' philosophy in terms of models of organization. This kind of how we can combine an individual approach with a flexible and free network sharing needs, sharing, with mutualization and so on. I mean, from the point of view of a political vision, is really an anarchist model. Because we are combining cooperative, community, communitarian, but also freestyle from the point of view of the individual approach. Yes, sorry.
We've just had some comments come through. I might just quickly read those, and then I'll turn to Jilly, who has a question. We had a comment earlier. I'm just going to read it, and then we'll move to Jilly's question. Do you think that one solution would be to make culture accessible online and monetize it through different instruments like video on demand platforms, paid content on social media, or crowdfunding on platforms like Patreon? I think that's a really interesting question, and perhaps other people might have comments in response to that. And while you're thinking of those comments, we might move to Jilly. If you'd like to ask your question, Jilly.
Yes, it's Gilly in the United Kingdom.
I'm sorry, Gilly. Sorry about that.
Right, literally. It's a bit of a complicated question and maybe slightly too political for this forum, but I couldn't sort of get away from it. So as far as I can understand from your proposals, what I hear is that these things work to satisfy, or at least put up with, our current neoliberal situation and make use of the same values like competition, for instance. So when I was thinking about how you were talking about, we should put our creative skills to work, these immaterial forms of labor, they've already been, the capacity for other people to use artistic skills in this way in the economy has already been really well documented and critiqued in lots of different sort of areas of thought. And of course, there are problems, economic and ecological ones, but also artistic ones with this, because as far as I understand, that then tends to produce sort of creatively conservative and particularly commercial artistic outcomes above transformative or transgressive possibilities. So I guess I'm thinking about whether you think it's possible for us to use these skills rather than to sort of try and play the game of neoliberalism and populism, which seems to me to be more of what we've been doing so far, actually, to try and play these games. And I think probably we all understand the sort of individual and collective fallout for that. I guess I'm wondering if you think there's a capacity for us, and I think you're sort of starting to talk about some of the models, for us to organise, to use our creative capacities to bring about other kinds of changes. I'm thinking particularly in the UK of how that there does seem to be reasonably enough money to run buildings and to pay people who work on those buildings, but there never seems to be quite enough money to pay the artists. So we're relegated or we occupy this situation of the precariat all the time. And now more and more people in other areas of the economy are joining us here. But maybe we've experienced it long enough and have the creative potential to try and organise for different ways of organising labour, for instance. Do you think that's like, we should give up on that? That's not a thing we can do? Or, I mean, I guess I'm wondering about this relationship between the political and the artistic too.
Okay. Not sure if I understand 100%. Okay, but I'm going to check also with the question you comment. If I understand well, and if not, just let me know. I mean, it's not an easy situation because the power balance we were talking about. No, in some way, I would like also to put on the table one really interesting speech from a science fiction writer that passed away last year. Is called Ursula K. Le Guin. Not sure if you know about her. I will try to put you also here or try to pass you the link, because she has a very beautiful speech about this kind of strategies. I mean, from an anarchist model and from the point of view of how we can, and it's connected with the idea of utopia, and it's connected with the idea of we don't like this world, but we are not going to fight in this sense with these rules, because there is no way to win this game. In this sense, it's going to produce just melancholy, because it's resist for nothing. So what we need is sometimes is not to fight against in a frontal way, but to avoid this kind of fight and create some kind of alternative examples. Okay, this will be because I cannot play football in the Premier League. I mean, there is nonsense, but this doesn't mean that I cannot play football. I can play football with my friends. I can play football with my work partners. I can play football in a local association. Okay, my objective is not to go to the Premier League. I'm 47 right now, so this is a nonsense, no? And I mean, it's something. It's a stupidity in some way, no? So the approach would be, or the strategy, again, with this kind of what kind of spaces are feasible for us, and how can imagine, because in some ways to reinvent, it's a question of imagination, it's a question of to create a new scenario, to create a new world, to create a new system of relationship with the audiences, to create new relationships, and to create new services, and to create this kind of new ways of works, new ways to organize, new vision and mission for us in some way, because maybe we were playing something that was not our game, and at the same time was wasting time. Okay? I mean, I'm making some kind of black and white picture just in order to create this kind of links or questions on the table. In this sense, for sure, again, with this general approach, we need also to consider that this is not a black and white picture. This is a technicolor picture, because, as we were saying at the beginning, diversity is a key word when we are managing reality. Okay? And in this sense, we are mixing the colors. We are mixing a scale, a degree of grace from this black and white thing, that may be, again, this idea of how we equalize the formula, how we are, and not just from today to tomorrow, but from today in a strategic planning for the next years, for how I, in some way, reinventing myself, I'm reinventing my relationships, I'm reinventing how I interact with the environment, and how I'm reinventing the environment. In this sense, it's also a question of alchemy, if you let me the expression, no? In this sense, is changing inside to changing outside. And sometimes it's impossible to change outside without starting from the the things that you can manage more clearly. Okay, I cannot change the world, but I can change my relationship with the world if I'm changing my values, if I'm changing my attitudes, if I am changing my behavior. So in this sense, it's a process of conscience, it's a process of competences, to put in value these competences we were talking about. It's a question of training, it's a question of practice, for sure. I mean, we are learning by doing. There is not master plan, because the reality is going to change and quite fast in this sense. It's not the same to have this webinar today than to have it in 6 months. Probably the situation is going to, we are in a mutations scenario, okay, and in a global scenario in this sense. So this question of adapting and this question of mixing the possible activities and so on, I think it's important. No, for sure we not can escape from the reality, but in some way we are constructing our own reality. It's again what I was talking about. Is if I'm focused in one reality, I'm a slave of this reality. You need to leave the things to let that new things emerge.
An example, Raluca has said a music venue in Rotterdam has started to organize neighborhood concerts, balcony concerts, courtyard concerts together for the Rotterdam communities. At this time, the governmental authorities were still analyzing the current situation and far from providing any kind of solution to our sector. We've also had a quote, you never change things by fighting against the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. And that's a quote from, I think, Buckminster Fuller. Just back to that comment we had earlier about digitizing the live arts. I'd just like to draw everyone's attention, it's in the chat, to the latest report from IETM, Live Arts in the Virtualizing World. The author is Elena Politseva, and if you look on the chat, you can see the link there, and it's on the IETM website. I'll just move now to another question, Raul, and we've scheduled really to finish in about 20 minutes. So it would be great to have some other people, if you'd like to speak, please just write through in the chat and we'll move straight on to you. We've got Marco from Copenhagen. He's asking, how much impact has hierarchy on these economical structures?
Sorry. I'm not sure I understand well the question. How much impact has
hierarchy on economical structures? Did you, Marco, did you want to comment on, did you want to ask your question? Marco from Copenhagen?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. I'm coming from dance, so what I see, like since I started, is like this ladder you have to reach till a certain point, and then you earn enough money, you're secure in your job, then you're in a big company, or you're like directing a studio or whatever, and then you're secure, and then you have this little spot, and like all the others, freelance artists or dancers, trying to get to that spot. And what I experience is like a very big competition, you know, like we're all friends, we're all colleagues, but when it comes to certain jobs, like there are applications of 500 people for one job, and then we fight each other as what is also normal, but this, for me, it makes everything even more precarious. And my idea would be like maybe to try to change those aspects within our field, like I'm speaking now from dance. So try to change like our structures, how we provide our jobs for our community and for our profession. And because I don't know so much about economical structures, I would be interested in how they relate to each other.
Okay. Yes. Now I get the picture. Just to be sure that I understand well. Okay, because it makes me think about. It's very important. I'm happy with the question, as the politician said, because in some way it's again this kind of relationship analysis. Okay, things are not disconnected. we need to think always, when we are analyzing a reality, everything is interconnected. And one of the tricky things of the economic analysis of the international commerce was that the fair play or the win-win situation exists from the point of view of the international, okay, some people can win without nobody losing, okay? We know nowadays that all the European development colonies and so on was your funeral, my trial, no? In some sense that the my benefit was your loss. We can see easily that it's, when you check the big numbers, you can see that, okay? Your question makes me think about in what sense a very hierarchical organization, very established, very powerful, full of resources, is possible from the precarity of the context. I'm afraid that my nose said that something smells there, no? I mean, there is this kind of transference connection between these kind of realities. I mean, it's impossible, the question of the accumulation of power, of the accumulation of capital, without extracting this capital, this power in some way. For example, I'm teaching in the university, okay? I'm not bureaucrat by now, but I have I passed very recently, because even precarity is affecting to the public services, no, and to the public workers. But in some way, it's, you can see this kind of from the point of view of the labor market, the question of the different systems with different logics. I've been working with the university as a freelance for 8 years before to get a contract of 5 years. And I can see the people that was bureaucrat, they were working with different logics. I mean, this kind of, that this is another thing to consider in the labor market, and it's important, no? The labor market for sure is a must, because it makes sense, this kind of relationship between capital and labor. It's possible, the accumulation of capital without the precarity of workers? No, because finally the money goes for one resource, that is the capital, or to the other. I mean, it's the plus value of a Marxist analysis, no? So in this sense, you can see also this kind of ghettos, because they are working with different logics. From the point of view of the connections, I would say, if a bureaucrat is being paid with my taxes that I'm paying as a freelance, there is right now a connection between your privilege in your work position and, I mean, it's not to, let's go burn the house. I mean, it's not like that, but for sure this approach is clear. I mean, the privilege is not possible to understand without who is supporting this privilege. Privilege is not a manna, or is not a God's gift from the sky. It's this kind of system of, not sure which one is the word in English, but it's like in chemistry, there is this connection between this glass and this glass. Okay, there is some kind of bridge that this glass is feeding this one. The communication between different rooms, in this sense, are all, the reality is interconnected. Environmental system and economical systems are interconnected. Social exclusion and I mean, in Spain we have a very clear picture about the rescue of the banks in Spain, of the financial system, was 60 million euros. The cuts in the public services, education and health in the welfare system was 60 million euros. Is coincidence? Doesn't look like, no? Is this? I'm agree with that.
We're just going to move on here to some other comments that we've had about universal basic income and whether that plays into these new models. People are talking about ethical banks like Triodos. Why don't we reach out to them or collaborate with them? And we've also had a comment about competition is coming from the funding models. And if we're looking for other models outside the sector, then perhaps this, this competition that Marco was talking about won't be such an issue. So how do we advocate to corporate organizations about the value of the cultural sector?
Okay, it's this question of basic income it's right now another hot potato. Okay, another key question, another key word, and I'm totally agree in the sense and it's curious because again this question of the dynamics of the evolution of the reality. Okay, this question of how times are accelerating, how the situation is day by day. What yesterday was a weak signal, today it's a clear signal or a strong voice. Okay, for example, I remember last year there was a call in the European projects that the director of my research unit, where I'm working, the Cultural Economics Research Unit of the University of Valencia, the director Pau Rausey was designing for a call that was called Urban Innovative Actions. I can't remember the framework, okay? But it was some kind of specific call to the cultural sector to present projects connected with innovative actions, innovative projects that can create some kind of experimental testing, checking, possible. I can send you more details about this question also, because I'm afraid to touch the computer and escape from the room. So I will not touch nothing. Okay. And this proposal was exactly this thing. The proposal of Pau, of the director, was let's go to use 300,000 euros, the budget of the project, to create a call for the people to create some kind of basic income. Okay, here you have per people, you have 20,000 euros to manage, to do whatever you want, freestyle. Okay, and let's see in this kind of drop by drop system of finance, what kind of impact the work of the project was to evaluate, what the people was using the money for. Okay, the risk was let's go to the bar. Okay, but we suppose that the people with this money was more, the commitment was a serious thing. Okay, so doing this kind of drop by drop, if it's correct, the meaning, investment on the ecology of the actors. Okay, what kind of synergies, what kind of self-organization dynamics, what kind of react, what happens? It was an experiment to see, okay, because what we can see when we are talking about public policies, we are talking about the budget of cultural investment, for example, no? Cultural budget. But what you can see in the cultural budget is that if we are talking about 100% of the budget, maybe 40%, and again, the question of the hierarchy we were talking about, it goes just to sustain the bureaucracy that is developing these public policies. So you are talking about what 100,000 euros of, it's too much, it's big, it's short, it's small. Which one is the distribution of this budget? Must be the first question to consider. Okay, and in this sense, bureaucracy sometimes eats a lot of this budget, or bigger structures eats a lot of this budget in terms of how much money they need to open the door and to the program and so on, especially with this kind of policy styles of big events, big exhibitions, an opera and so on. For sure, I know it's not that we don't need these kind of things, but we need to, in a scenario that we can see a big asymmetry between all the people, the workers, the precariat that we were talking about, the small and medium companies and so on, and this kind of elite approach of culture with big spaces, museums, and so on. I mean, this kind of imbalance of power, of resources between the capital, again, and the work, it's important to rethink the models of funding. And this was, yes.
Sorry. I was just going to say, but what can we do to actually contribute towards, for example, a universal basic income, maybe just within the arts? What can we actually do? Because, I mean, everything that you're describing is, you know, we know those structures. That's what we're talking about. But what can we actually do? And one of the questions we had earlier from Talia was actually about who do we actually advocate to? Because governments are the places that we normally in the arts, we're advocating for ourselves or our sector. But what can we do to actually make this happen?
For example, in Spain, I have right now a new from a new recent new that it has been more than 1,000 of professionals are reclaiming in Spain this question as the best cultural policy, possible cultural policy. First, communicate. I mean, again, organization, we need to organize. It's not the same that you ask, I make a comment on Facebook or on Twitter. We need to, okay, if we are 600,000 workers, cultural workers, not do this kind of reclamation sector by sector, but to put all the sectors and to unite in this reclaim and to make visible this reclaim and to argue and to create arguments and to create strategic alliances, for example, with the university that we were talking about. I mean, how is possible that this kind of reclaim from this sector, it is the same that it was like the super experimental approach 1 year before. And now we are seeing that it's a must from the point of view of the users, from the point of view of the workers. Okay, so again, will be what we can do. You need a strategy. We need a strategy that is connected with this question of how we organize, how we mobilize, how we make visible, how we unite, how we make numbers. If we got the numbers, use the numbers. Make clear the numbers in terms of people, in terms of workers, in terms of employment, but also in terms of knowledge. Let's go to communicate. Without a journal, it's impossible to communicate in this way. Without the presence in the media, it's impossible to communicate to the society. And we need to win the society, because without the society, without the support of the society, politicians are not going to listen, because votes are the things that they react. Without a social clear position pro cultural sector, even the cultural sector unite, is not really easy to negotiate with the administration.
So you're talking about collective organization, not just within our sectors, but across sectors, what you were talking about earlier about the transsectoral organization. Yeah, and that as an approach.
Yes, again, diversity. I mean, this kind of, we need to organize in the sector. That is not easy, okay? We need to organize in the sector, not just at the regional level, but at the national level, even at the international level. We need to connect these networks. We need to create some kind of common front, just from the point of view of the sector, okay? This is important to create this kind of message. And I'm not talking because me, I'm talking because all these people is behind, okay? The representation. When we are talking about participation, if we don't have representation, participation is nothing, because you are not representing nobody. We need to try to balance this question of participation and representation. But again, if we have in common as the different disciplines, the design, the performing arts, the music, the architecture, etc., etc., if we are in the same boat and we are sharing this, I would say we need a common front between the different disciplines. Again, between all these levels, local, regional, blah, 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 to create some kind of platforms. For this, digital tools are very useful to create this kind of common front. And even, I will tell that, not just from the point of view of the cultural sector, but also including other productive sectors that we are closer to, or we are in the, because finally, this kind of basic income is not just for the cultural sector, can be also for other sectors a solution. So
absolutely, and look, we have reached 1/2 but we will continue for those of you that can stay for another half an hour or so. Raul, I think you had another section you wanted to cover, but I feel like it might be really great if we do, speaking of participation, if we do ask people to maybe come forward and talk a little bit about their own models or concrete thoughts they have about moving forward. So within, to move us from the paradigm, the pre-COVID paradigm, and some concrete things that maybe are already happening, or some things that people have already, some thoughts about actions that we can actually take. We had, for example, the idea of a Bitcoin digital type funding generation for the arts, moving away from the traditional banking and finance structures. So yeah, please do come forward now. If we spend the last part, we'll continue the conversation, but if you'd like to speak along any of these lines, that would be great to hear from you. Raul, what do you think? Is that, yeah?
No, sorry, I'm getting lost a little bit.
I'm just saying that it would be great to turn to all the participants to actually make some comments about some concrete actions or thoughts that they have about what can be done, as we've been seeing coming through on the chat. I'm going to turn to people to actually comment now a little more so that we can hear from them. I might turn to Pippa Bailey has just made a comment. Did you want to speak to that, Pippa? You're working in the area of innovative collaborative social change, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Pippa, did you want to speak? No? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes. Are you unmuted?
I am unmuted, sorry.
Great. That's all right.
Technology at this time of night. I've recently moved slightly out of the arts and working in this area of social change, and it's very interesting to me that there is a real push towards radical localism, which you've kind of mentioned, Raul, which is very much environmentally sustainable. You know, it's driven by environmental sustainability, and in that there's very entrepreneurial new initiatives coming out of that, where communities are coming together, they're finding resources that they're putting aside to help each other when when somebody's really struggling, and their attitude is very much that neither the government nor big business are going to help them. So I think that's a really interesting kind of emergent model in this space. And I think I just also want to ask you, because there seems a real tension between we are going to play the game and be competitive and rely on all the same structures that are really, are making us collapse, I think, as somebody said in the chat, with the idea of how do we get together with other sectors and have a kind of unionized approach, a collective and collaborative approach. And there seems to be a very big tension there. So I'd love you to speak to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting, this approach, because as we were saying, this kind of exchange of ideas and collaborative learning and connections between, it's again what we were talking about when we said the culture in the Cultural Agenda 21, okay, this kind of movement of local governments for rethinking the local cultural policies. And it's interesting, the local approach, because proximity, okay? as it happens in the gentrification processes, where the evidences of the bad practices of the logics of the system can be clear, is in the territories, okay, in the neighborhoods. Gentrification is really clear because it affects to the housing and it affects to the population, and it's connected with this kind of global movements of speculation funds, and at the same time with the question of the how the local governments are selling the cities in order to get cash. I mean, it's a really clear picture of what has nonsense in this kind of logics that we are living in. No, gentrification in this sense, gentrification processes. I'm sure you have some information about that, are really clear in this sense. So this question of the local approach of the global tendencies or global logics, how we connect global and local in this multi-level approach that we were talking. We are in the same planet. We are living at in our specific local realities, but finally everything is interconnected in this sense. It happens the same when we are talking about relationship between culture and development, how cultural actors interact with other social activists or environmental activists. If we want to put in value how culture can help to transform the model of development and the vision of development and make some kind of critique to this kind of new clothes or old clothes of the emperor, no? I'm not sure if my pronunciation is correct. Emperor old clothes, because it is not new.
Emperors,
This kind of alliances with other activists, it's a basic, no? In this sense, all this question of the social innovation, this kind of alternative models of consume, of production, all these kind of questions, more link. I mean, finally, it's how we are sharing in this kind of social movements scenario, how we interact with this in order to share our action plan in some way. And also at the same time, how this is connected with the audiences we are approaching to. So if finally we want to put culture as a pillar of the transformation of the model of development, we need for sure to create this kind of network with the other agents that are working with this in this process of transformation. We are not alone in this sense, and we need this kind of alliances to transform, but also to learn from them. And in this sense, it's really interesting the question of the innovative, collaborative social change, because it's connected at the same time. Can be a possible resource to learn from the kind of practices, models of organization, kind of actors they are working with, etc., etc.
I mean, even, for example, Raluca from the Netherlands mentioned a little earlier that the agricultural sector there, as a result of lobbying, received a reimbursement for the lost crop and heavy funding, whereas the cultural sector, you know, has got less than half the budget. So perhaps there's even things to learn from sectors like the agricultural sector and how they've actually lobbied. You know, I mean, sectors that are completely not just activists and people who are along the same thinking as us, but perhaps also even completely outside. I'm not sure what you think about that, Raul. Did you want to speak to that, Raluca?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, hey from Rotterdam. Yes, indeed. I think the problem of the sector in the Netherlands, of the cultural sector, is that exactly what we've been talking this whole time. It's about organization, it's about unity, it's about creating alliances, and it's a highly individualistic sector, I find. There's some cooperation, but you wouldn't. It's always following some kind of agenda. So I wouldn't say that it's something that, you know, people come together because of you know, they want to strive and for the well-being and the growth of the sector. So there's always some kind of an agenda behind. And you see that as a problem, especially in situations like this when we should really work together. And I'm part of several conversations with the sector about what to do. And one of the problems is that also people here are really heavily relying on funding, on governmental funding. But at the same time, there's not really this unity and this alliance that we are talking about. And the lobbying, it's still at an individualistic level. So you see the big players, the big festival organizers that are lobbying the government on their behalf. But then there's not really a unitary lobbying that's really for the well-being of the sector. And there's a lot of movement on the, let's say, more bottom-up kind of organization. So like, for example, what we do with our venue. And we really started, we saw, okay, we are in a really difficult situation and we need to find a way to keep connected and engaged with our audiences. So what can we do? And then we started being creative and we said, okay, let's try with this neighborhood concerts. And it's actually something that's being received very well by the communities in Rotterdam. But then we are seeing the authorities still, you know, limiting us and saying, okay, this concert cannot take place because it's still a public place. You know, so we are trying to find ways to keep on going, but then it's still, the problem is that the authorities don't really have a solution. They don't have a solution for what's going on. And then I think also what's been mentioned before is that it's really important to really be creative and find your own way along these restrictions, and then find and occupy your place in the market, as Raul was saying before.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that, Raluca. I'd just like to turn to Isa Curler, who has a great example. Do you want to just talk about that example? Are you there, Isa? I'll read out your message because I don't think we can't hear you. You're on mute. You have a nice example of how the big players can support the freelance artists. The Opera in Munich collected money, which is now distributed within the freelance community of artists in the city. The distribution is based on the financial need of the artists. I'll move on to Marco, who wanted to make a comment about the digital theme.
Hello, do you hear me? Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I personally have a problem with like the approach of digital space is a solution for certain situations, because I personally feel if we put the arts like stage arts or like arts with a real audience in the digital space, we lose a lot of our power, because like this gathering of people together and then talking and discussing what happened afterwards is something what drives us and gives us opportunities, community, and supports us. So I think in general, like this digital approach is for me very, very carefully to take. I'm a little bit afraid when people like go really into it and like put everything for free on YouTube now. It's nice also, it's nice to share. It's nice to keep each other motivated, but like to go now fully into this digital space, yeah, it scares me a little bit, especially for dance. I find it very uninteresting. I'm sorry, but dancing internet is not so interesting for me.
I'm sure there's many of us who agree with you. And again, point to everyone to the IETM recent report that I mentioned earlier that was in the chat, and that would be great to have a look at in relation to that topic. I'm just going to turn to Lucy, who's made a comment. I feel like the arts are lost in the loud and assertive voices of the big lobby machines. Lucy, did you want to speak to this comment? No, okay, I'll keep going then, unless you chime in. So the big lobby machines in Ireland, agriculture, pubs, business, health, we're not heard. We're too polite and too subtle. Governments are formed and influenced by voters, so they feel obliged to respond to the loudest voice. But now they have an opportunity to demand something back from those whom they bail out. And we know that we give a lot back. So why does that not get heard more? It's a really interesting point. If anyone would like to comment, or Raoul, you might have a comment there, that we're just too polite and too quiet in our sector.
Yes, I like also this analogy with agriculture we were talking. There are like some ideas, this kind of because what we were saying, no, this kind, we are in a same kind of logic, okay, between capital and work. We can see this from the people that is working in the agriculture sector, no? How this kind of big chains of food are getting big benefits, and sometimes the worker, the people that is working the land, and in this sense, it's really interesting, the analogy between agriculture and culture in the sense, in the way that from different kind of elements, but both are basic things, one more from the point of view of food security and the other for the soul security. If you let me the expression, I mean, it can be some kind of parallel situation of the workers finally in the different sectors, and also with this kind of systems of distribution, the lobbies we were talking about, etc., etc. This is important. Another thing that I want to remark also, and in this sense about the food also, the industrial approach to food and all the question of sustainable food, ecological production, small production, and so on. I mean, there are some kind of parallel things that it's not the topic, but it's important to remark. Second, the question of the lack of organization of the sector. As I told you, the sector, it has, we don't have to beat ourselves, okay? But it has to make a reflection also about bad practices and bad behaviors and non-good practices that we have been developing, for example, in the sense of the arts for art's sake approach, or this kind of elitist vision, and or lack of relationship with the social actors, or lack of interaction between disciplines. I mean, this kind of lack of organization, or disorganization profile that the sector has, no? Because maybe sometimes because the autism, because we are living in our own heads. I don't know why, because we are artists, no? In this sense, I'm a little bit out of the human world, no? In this sense, it's something that we need to change. For sure, there is another important thing, that is this kind of asymmetry inside the same sector. We are talking about a bipolar sector. It's a sector that the keyword is also, again, the missing link. There is nothing in the middle. We have or precariat, small and medium companies, freelancers, and so on, or then we have big companies. And when we are talking about the sector, there is not one cultural sector. There are very different interests and expectations and positions of, it's not the same to speak about Netflix than speak about a small social documentary company that is working with in the neighborhood with a participatory approach and so on, and with a focus of digital alphabetization of people with risk of exclusion. I mean, there are like this kind of very, very bipolar, again, this is an important word, and there is a lack of dimension of companies that can create some kind of there is in a cultural sector, there is no bourgeois, okay? Or we have lumpen proletariat, or we have aristocracy, but it's nothing in the middle. And this is also a plus difficulty to articulate the sector. And we are seeing that to articulate the sector is a must. From the point of view of what is abundant, I think that the aristocracy, the elite, the big fish, is not our problem, and they know with capital how to organize, how to make this kind of lobby and so on. But from the point of view of what is going to be this lumpen proletariat, right now we are the precariat, but this way we are going lumpen proletariat if we don't avoid, okay, I don't want to be apocalyptic at the same time, there is a margin of hope in this sense if we try to go for that. No, if we have fear and we don't move, this will happen. But if we react, this can be avoided. Okay, so this question of the articulation of the sector is basic, and it's connected also with the speech of Raluca, if I remind well. Okay, and the same with the question of the digitalization. I mean, this is like, I remember when we were talking about, when I was studying ecological economics, there was a difference between ecological economics and environmental economics. Okay, environmental economics was green capitalism. To change, apparently to change nothing. Okay, the logic of the system was the same. The spirit of the capitalism was the same. Ecological economics was some kind of restart the system, redesign the system, to change, to think about the values that were designing the logics of the system and so on. I mean, it changed totally the philosophy and the values of the production and consumption model in the ecological economics approach. Environmental economics was just a new coat of green paint on the machine. Okay, so with the digitalization, if we don't rethink the system, for me, in my opinion, it's going to, and we don't change the philosophy, it's going just a factor to accelerate this kind of differences and to accelerate the process of extraction of benefits from the work to the capital.
Thanks, Raul. Pilar wanted to make a comment about her experience of campaigning.
Yes, hi. I work mainly in the PYA sector, in performing arts for young audiences. I'm a new vice chair of the PYA England, although I'm not English, but I live in England, in Bristol. And it's very interesting because so far, always, whenever we've tried to do campaigning and lobbying politicians or, you know, the Art Council and stuff, the same wall is the fact that our impact is not measurable enough because our assets are intangible. So obviously, it's really hard to compete with those industries that have tangible values to offer. So then, yeah, we say, right, so we have to work on our, you know, measuring of our impact. But we do also have to accept that there's mainly our value is intangible, and that doesn't mean that it values less. So I think, in a way, I've learned that, fine, there's something that we still have to campaign along those lines, but I also agree very much with what you've been saying, Raul, that we really need to create a new model that is a mixed model that combines sort of, not fighting, because I don't really believe in anger. I don't think that takes anywhere. It's just being more strategic. So sort of playing the game in a way, and also creating these new models that, as far as I've seen, they are much more productive, and they bring much more sort of tangible results, and they allow us to live and survive in an economy that, yeah, it combines all sort of, you know, different things that are some bit more anarchist, they're sort of community-based, engaging with private companies that not necessarily have to be the largest ones. So that's something particular. And then a second point I wanted to make was basically a question, because it's really, I've been in Europe for about 3 years, no more than that, 6 years now. Anyway, I've always been an out. I'm from Chile, and in Chile, for example, the ethical banks now are playing a really important role for supporting the arts, and I don't see the same in Europe. I see that they're much more linked to ecological things and farming and stuff like that, and organic stuff, but not the art. So I wonder why and what's happened and why we're not there, because it feels from what I've seen and experienced back in Chile, it's a great ally for us. Yeah, and I suppose the third thing in relation to the digital stuff and all, I know that we're all very anxious about, suddenly we're all online, and I just say, guys, this is just a period of time. It's not forever. We're going to recover our audiences. We're going to be there with our public. We're going to touch each other. We're going to go back to that. So I just say, I say that to all the people I work with, like, just breathe and relax and wait, because we'll go back. We're humans. We're going to go back to that. So don't worry. Just experiment as with what we have. Let's adapt to this is a virtual site specific situation, and just play with it as we always do it with our situations, and it will go past, and we've learned something, but we'll get back to what we actually really like and love, and what I sort of soul. So don't worry about that.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you. I've just Sylvia's had commented on that. Actually, digitalization is not the enemy if we keep ourselves strong in using it and not be used by it. Thanks so much, Pilar, for those great 3 points. I might just turn to Raul to comment on that question of measuring our impact. And one thought I had is there a danger in using the language of financial value which is what we usually do in the arts, because we speak within the language of value within the systems that we're in. And I know you've written and done quite a lot of research about the intangible value of arts. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Just a comment. I'm not sure if it is comment of technology is not the enemy. Okay, I'm not sure if I make this kind of impression. For sure, I mean, we cannot have this kind of marvelous webinar without the technology. So for sure, technology is not enemy, but technology is not neutral. This is a question that we must consider. Investment in technology is not neutral. And technology, as the announcement, is what you do with it, okay? Technology can be used for one thing or for another. And sometimes technology has also impact on the distribution of costs and benefits. We are talking about digital divide, for example, between rural population and urban population. So, I mean, it's important to consider also that the technology is not heaven, is not hell, but we need to consider, technology in our strategies, but at the same time, we have to take care of technology in the sense that can create also, can resolve problems and can create new ones. No? It was just, and in terms of distribution of costs and benefits, for example, or accessibility in terms of users and who is out of the picture with the technology. At the same time, technology is one solution, is not the final solution, or is not the magical key, okay? In the sense that for me, it's not technology or analogic, it's how we combine. If I have to listen music, I like to listen music in cassette, I like to listen music in vinyl, I like to listen music in CD, because each one of these formats has their possibilities. Even Spotify right now, it's an open or this kind of big platforms, no? In terms of accessibility to these resources. So from the point of view is, again, diversity, and again, complementarity between this kind of different rooms of the house, okay? But I'm thinking about the building, not just to focus on this. So this is also important to, because it's digitalization right now is a must in this situation of the concrete situation, and be careful with the possible evolution of the process, okay, with how it's going to reactivate the economy. About which one was the word you asked me your question? Sorry, because you told me about the value.
Yeah, so the intangible value, and we'll probably have to make this the last comment, Raul, because I think we've gone quite over time. Thank you. Yeah, so intangible value.
Very short. We need a basic vocabulary, economic vocabulary, and economic tools just for dummies, okay? But just for dummies in the sense, if we have and then to start, for dummies to start and then going on. But we need it because finally we are in a process of negotiation, okay? Actively or passively, but we are negotiating in the market. So first you have to have at least this kind of basic vocabulary or this kind of basic criteria in order not to be cheat, okay? Because the market is cheating market. I mean, we can see the government cheats, it's correct, the word? It's a tricky thing, I mean, and it's what we're talking about, no? So the government is tricky and cheat you, and the market it cheats you, so is this kind of situation that you must to have some kind of barriers to not be cheat, no, in this sense. So if we are going to negotiate access for funding to present a project, etc., 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 we need some kind of basic vocabulary in order to, and basic templates from economic analysis in terms of we are know what we are talking about when we are talking about budget, the distribution of the budget, the possible income, I mean, all the questions that from the point of view of cultural management, you need from the point of view of economy, okay, from the economic management. But at the same time, it's not just this, because as we are seeing that culture has to remark their influence in the development processes, in the local development processes, in this kind of local development, local sustainability or local development or social inclusion, etc., etc., you must create evidences. It's not just that you have a narrative that this is good because it's good. You need to create arguments and a storytelling, okay, a vision about which one are the benefits of this activity on the welfare of the population or in the terms of, okay, the different impacts that can be developed. I can provide you also some kind of report that we do about this, so you can also have a clear picture of this. And then you need in some way to justify these evidences, creating some kind of numbers. You have to mix the storytelling with the evidences, because if you are going to negotiate, for example, in a call for projects, if you are going to have an interview with the local community, you need to make clear the value of your project in terms of social development, in terms of education, in terms of development of democratic practices and public participation, in terms of make visible emerging problems, in terms of creation of employment or develop creative competences, for example, that is, and consider that right now, if you don't develop your own vocabulary, you are subliminally accepting the dominant discourse. For example, we are talking about economic value, but we nowadays just talk about value of change, not value of use. That is very, very important in this non-monetary exchange systems we were talking about. I mean, which one is the value of use of the culture? Not in terms of go to the market and get some money and then, but in terms of human development, in terms of education, in terms of conscience transformation, etc., etc., etc. Okay? In terms of questions that we are not talking about crematistic also. So, for example, this is important, and we are not talking about just economic value, social value, environmental value. There are a lot of values, diversity again. Sorry.
Raul, thank you so much. I've just put on the chat, everyone, a link to EconCult where you can get a lot more information and read some of Raul's research and publications. I'd like to thank you, Raul, for this wonderful conversation. It's been great to look at and think about different strategies to transform from our pre-COVID situation into the future. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for contributing to the conversation. I'd like to bring your attention to the next IETM webinar, which is on the 19th of May, and it's called Rewiring the Network. And that will be about brainstorming the sustainability of the sector. It's only open to members. So that's on the 19th of May. Raul, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have this conversation with you.
It has been a pleasure. I just hope that my abstract mind has been not really too much in terms of, I hope to be useful, to be clear, to create some kind, not answers, but intelligent questions, provoking this kind of reactions in our minds, in our souls, finally in our spirits, no? And a pleasure for me. Thanks for the opportunity, and we keep in touch. You have also through the web my mail, so please feel free to write, ask more things, and so on.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.